I'm from Canada.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Richard Krause for the list of Canadian sci-fi and fantasy films that will wrap their robotic arms around you in a warm Canadarm hug. I'll tell you about a government manhunt to eliminate the rise of machine consciousness, a war-ravaged totalitarian future, marginalized superheroes, and a slimy little creature. First up, though, an animated, malevolent rock star. Spin magazine called Rock and Roll the 1983 Nelvana musical the greatest oddball sci-fi musical ever committed to animation cells. The first Canadian animated feature to be produced in English, it's set in a post-apocalyptic world inhabited by humanoid animals. Don Franks voices Mock Swagger, an aging rock star who's searching for a voice with a special frequency to summon a powerful demon from another dimension who will immortalize his legacy. When he discovers and kidnaps singer Angel, voiced by Susan Roman, her bandmates embark on an adventure to rescue her. The all-Canadian voice cast was supported with original songs by Cheap Trick, Debbie Harry, Lou Reed, Iggy Pop, and Earth, Wind and Fire. A flop in its original release, Rock and Roll's wild slice of 1980s animation has gone on to become a cult classic. Producer Michael Hirsch, one of the founders of the animation giant Nelvana, supplies some background on the difficult-to-find but worth the search Rock and Roll. Tell me a little bit about putting Lou Reed and Iggy Pop and Earth, Wind and Fire and Cheap Trick and Debbie Harry all together.
The background is that rock and roll was always conceived to be a rock opera. And we were aiming at kind of that young adult audience. We weren't aiming at little kids, but it would work for little kids. We weren't aiming at older adults. We were working, like let's call it 12 to 30. So we had a range, we had that narrow sort of goal. So rather than pick one composer who would do all the music, we had the unique approach of casting musical artists who were representative of the character, would ask them to write music for. So Debbie Harry was our heroine, Angel, and she and Chris Stein wrote Angel's music. And Lou Reed was the villain Mock, and he wrote, Mock's music. And Iggy Pop was the demon brought up from the netherworld by Mock, and he wrote the demon's music. And Earth, Wind and Fire wrote the disco music for the show. And Cheap Trick did the music for our hero, Omar, and his band. And so you had music that somehow in the end, and partly because of Trisha Cullen's influence, as an overall composer of the soundtrack, worked really well together. And I think it was also the casting, that the casting in the end was really good. And so their music melded because their characters were all part of one story, and they all read the script and they all saw storyboards. And so it was a real sort of unique effort. I'm not sure I've seen another rock opera composed that way.
Rock and rule. Journey to a world where the cosmic forces of music, magic, and technology collide, bringing you head to head with a beast from another dimension.
Debbie Harry was the first in the group to agree to do the film. And when she agreed, Lou Reed really wanted to do it. Iggy Pop really wanted to do it. Cheap Trick was really happy to do it because Blondie at the time was one of the hottest acts. And, she was iconic. Debbie Harry was on posters, billboards, magazine covers. And in fact, I had an interesting experience of walking down the street with her and Chris Stein shortly after John Lennon had been killed. And Debbie was they were really paranoid because I think celebrities in general were paranoid because here was one of the biggest celebrities of all time, John Lennon, and he just gets shot by somebody who seems like a fan, right? And so they felt very vulnerable. But she wanted to walk out down the street. And so she put on her coat, put the collar up, put a kerchief over her head, big dark sunglasses, and walked down the street. And of course, everybody immediately is drawn to this person who's, trying to disguise herself and seem invisible. because she's so camouflaged, right?
Yeah.
And so everyone's looking at us and say, they immediately identify who it is.
Rock and rule. Good band, hot music, the best of times. It could have lasted forever.
Night Raiders, a dystopian drama from Cree Métis filmmaker Dennis Goulet, draws on the historical horrors of the 60s scoop and the residential schools to create an unforgettable dystopian scenario set in the near future. Set in a war-ravaged North America, society has crumbled, and cities are now run by the military. All children are property of the state. Forcibly removed from their families, these children are housed in state education academies. Laws are enforced by killer drones and heavily armed soldiers who execute parents for hiding their children. A Cree mother hides her daughter in the woods successfully until an injury forces them to go to an occupied city for medical treatment. Cut to 1 year later. The daughter is now in a re-education facility as her mother joins with a group of indigenous rebels called the Night Raiders with the hope of freeing all the inmates of the Children's Academy. I spoke with Dennis Goulet about the film, why she chose to make a genre dystopian film to address historical issues, and much, much more.
You have a child at the academy?
She was taken in the fall.
The academy want to start the war again, and they'll force our kids onto the front lines of it.
I'm gonna find her again, on the other side.
As long as we have one piece of land, they will always come for us.
Is it too late?
No, but we have to go now.
The movie very effectively displays the horrors of residential schools, the 60s scoop. Why choose to tell the story in the form of a genre film? You've made a dystopian film. Was that a choice to be able to approach a historical truth in a slightly different way?
I found that moving into the genre space after only doing straight up drama opened up a kind of freedom for me as a filmmaker to really hit hard into the things that I wanted to talk about when you're no longer confined by reality. And then I think it also offered a layer of protection for everyone involved when you sort of take it out of this time and space and put it somewhere imaginary. And then also, I just wanted it to be a fresh entry point into a topic, I think, that is very hard for people to grapple with over a long period of time. I think when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission released their findings in 2015, everyone sort of jumped on the reconciliation bit when I think we hadn't really gotten through just grappling with the horror of the truth. And I think that grappling is really important. It's really important to acknowledge that history honestly, but I also know that there can be a fatigue around it because it is a really difficult subject matter. And so in order to hold that truth and keep the conversation going, I think it really benefits us to just come at this in a new way.
You have talked about film being part of the oral tradition. How do you see it that way? Is it just an extension of that for the 20th and 21st century?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the oral storytelling tradition is very much its own thing. It's a practice of listening. I was actually on stage with Alanisa Wamsamon yesterday for the TIFF Tribute Awards, and she was talking about growing up and just listening, and how powerful that sound is. And then, of course, in film, you add images and music, and I think the medium of film is a wonderful extension of our storytelling tradition.
Night Raiders effectively paints a somber portrait of a totalitarian future packed with foreboding and danger. The story is fictional but resonates with echoes of the ugly truths of colonization and forced assimilation. Goulet allows the viewer to make the comparisons between the real-life atrocities and the fictional elements of the story. There are no pages of exposition, just evocative images. Show me, don't tell me. The basis in truth of the underlying themes brings the story a weight often missing in the dystopian genre. Night Raiders packs historical relevance against a story of the resilience of the Cree people and avoids most of the easy cliches of other apocalyptic movies. Look for Night Raiders and the other films on this podcast on your local streaming services, but don't forget to support new Canadian films when they play in theaters. For reviews of new and old Canadian movies, check out my website at richardkrause.ca.
I'm from Canada!
Code 8 is speculative fiction set in the future, but addresses real-world issues like marginalization and the healthcare crisis. Robbie Amell is Connor Reed, one of the 4% of the population with extraordinary powers. Instead of being celebrated, however, Reed and his kind are discriminated against, forced to live in poverty. Blessed or cursed, depending on how you look at it, with the ability to generate electricity, Reed lives a quiet life, working in construction. The low-profile job keeps him off the radar of Agents Park and Davis, leaders of a militarized police unit, but doesn't earn enough to pay for his mother's mounting hospital bills. To make some much-needed cash, he agrees to expose his abilities to aid crime boss Marcus Sutcliffe and his sadistic henchmen. The aura of X-Men hangs heavy over Code 8. Director and co-writer Jeff Chan has recontextualized the idea of super beings being persecuted for their powers. They don't wear costumes or have character names like Electro or attend Tony private schools, but all the roads lead back to artist and co-writer Jack Kirby and writer Stan Lee's timely take on the mistrust of those seen as different. There's more grit here, and the characters aren't as showy. They're simply trying to survive in a world that's inhospitable to them. Chan does a really good job of balancing the action with ideas, effortlessly mixing and matching real-world and sci-fi elements to create a movie that has enough to say about the fear of diversity and tolerance to earn a look. I asked star Robbie Amell about the film. Science fiction's never about laser guns or whatever.
If it is, you're in trouble.
It is. Absolutely. And a lot of people make this mistake. What it is are about these universal truths. And in this movie, you talk about how people who are, quote, different are vilified often, are pushed to the outside. There's comments on healthcare. There are very real world issues all tangled up in this kind of extraordinary story. And that's, I think, what makes the movie interesting is that no matter what window, what lens you look at it through, you're seeing something that you can relate to because there are more people outside the circle than there are on the inside.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean,
that was really long.
No,
I'm sorry.
I appreciate that. When we talked about what we wanted to do, we knew we wanted to make something that we were fans of.
Yeah.
And something that was in our wheelhouse and something that we thought we could sell. Because above everything else, we need to entertain people. Mm-hmm. If we're going to ask you for money and we make a relationship drama and you fall asleep, we're not going to feel very good, and neither are you. So we looked at it and we thought, okay, we know we can do the action. We know we can do the sci-fi. We know we've got great people to do the visual effects. Where do we go from here? And we wanted a relatable story. We wanted something that people could connect with. And at its core, our movie is about how far someone will go to save a loved one. And everyone can relate to that. With that being said, we also wanted to ask questions or pose questions. One of the really cool things about the short film was the YouTube comments. People argued about whether they thought my character was at fault or not. And we wanted that in the film. We never wanted to feel like we were preaching, but, we wanted to mirror some things in the world today in our own way. The sci-fi part of it is kind of like an entertaining gift wrap around a crime drama. Mm-hmm. So, the idea that these people are marginalized and these people are just trying to get by was our twist on the superhero genre.
Code 8 is on streaming services right now. People can check it out on Bell On Demand, on Rogers On Demand, wherever you find your films. What would you hope that people take away from this movie? Is it just, a fun ride, or do you want there to be a message here too?
I think it depends who's watching it, to be honest with you. I think if you just want to watch something that you care about the people with some entertainment, you can get that out of it. With that being said, we wanted to make people think, and we wanted to put people in a position where they don't necessarily agree with the decisions that are being made on camera. And I think we did that. I think we created a world that feels close enough to reality, but still has a very entertaining backdrop. So I think we'll get people talking, and I would love that. I love when people don't agree about the decisions being made. I think that's life.
Here he comes.
Careful.
All clear.
That's it.
Heart rate stable. If we don't use human DNA now, someone else will.
Regulators and politicians, they tear us to pieces.
We're gonna go to jail for this.
Human cloning is illegal. This won't be human. Not entirely.
They grow up so quickly, don't they? One day they're slimy little creatures who look like a cross between Yul Brynner and a slug. The next they're flesh-eating, underwater-breathing, alien-looking supermodel types. At least that's the way it is in Splice, a sci-fi thriller starring Sarah Polley and recent Oscar winner Adrien Brody about a creature who goes from newborn to troubled teen in just a matter of weeks. Clive, played by Adrien Brody, and Elsa, played by Sarah Polley, are biochemists and boyfriend and girlfriend who developed a splicing technology which binds the DNA from multiple animals to create new life and possibly cures for everything from Parkinson's to cancer. It's the medical breakthrough of the century. The next logical step is to fuse human and animal DNA, but despite their success in the lab, their employers, the evil conglomerate Newstead Pharma, is wary of the publicity such a radical step would incur. Secretly, the pair go rogue, continue their experiments, and give quote-unquote birth to a new life form they dub Dren. That's nerd spelled backwards. A tailed creature resembling a bald dinosaur. Clive, conflicted by the ethical and moral issues of cloning, wants to kill the creature, but Elsa won't have it. Dren develops at a rapid pace, changing from unrecognizable organism to something akin to a humanoid kangaroo. Soon, though, problems arise. The creature becomes Daddy's little, whatever, leaving Elsa to deal with Dren's difficult puberty. Like the hybrid creature at the center of the action, Splice is a cross of genres, part B-movie sci-fi and part body horror a la David Cronenberg. Liberally mixing The Island of Dr. Moreau, Frankenstein, and The Brood, Splice examines ideas of life and death, of playing God, and what it is to be human and what is not human. There are plenty of moral concepts to chew on, many ruminations to be had on what it is to be human, but only if you look past the B-movie thrills director Vincenzo Natali slathers on with a trowel. I spoke with Sarah Polley about the film at the time of the movie's release in 2009. I wanted to ask you about one thing that I read that you said after a screening of it in Sundance, and you said, this movie is morally indefensible. Tell me what you meant by that.
I think that it pushes boundaries, and I think it pushes boundaries that we're uncomfortable to push. And I think that the best movies in this genre, that's kind of what they do. And I think that generally, I'm not a fan of this kind of genre because I feel like the risks that people like David Cronenberg, took, from the beginning, are not often taken. And so when I love a movie in this genre, I absolutely love it. And I felt that way when I read this script. I was just so astonished at its courage. And at times that courage is questionable. I mean, I think it goes to places that you don't necessarily want it to go, and it makes you really uncomfortable. And again, I sort of feel like that's what, interesting art does a lot of the time. It doesn't always have to do that, but it's pretty great when it does.
I was trying to figure out how I would explain this movie to people without giving anything away, right? Because there's a lot of sort of twists and turns, and you don't want people to know too much about it going in, because then the great pleasure of the movie is kind of ruined. So I was kind of thinking, well, if I was to describe it to people, I'd describe it as kind of a mix of Mummy Dearest and Frankenstein.
That's actually pretty good. I would say there's like a pretty large dose of like Freud at his most horrifying in there as well. And I think, one of the things that really drew me to the film is when I was reading the script, every time I got to a place where I thought, oh my God, can you imagine if this happened? But thank God it won't, because it's a movie and they'll never do that. it happened 10 pages later. And I was like, what kind of psychopath will make this film? And so I was just sort of excited to see where it was going to go and how it was going to possibly work. And in the middle of it, I think is this like, you know, amazing character that I think so rarely gets written for women, like someone who's this kind of driven and single-focused and ambitious and deeply flawed and deeply complicated and super tough. And I'd never played anyone like that at all, so that was kind of exciting too.
Splice goes to places that bigger budget science fiction wouldn't dare to tread. This isn't the enviro-friendly sci-fi of James Cameron or the space opera of George Lucas. No, this has more in common with the exploitation films of Roger Corman. There's an icky creature, some scientist sexy time, and loads of crazy science. Corman may not have been as successful in portraying the love, jealousy, and real human emotions that Natalie heaps on his characters, but I think the B-movie king would have approved of Splice's overall tone. It doesn't skimp on the blood and guts, but it's funnier than you think it's going to be, wilder than expected. Sarah Polley's maternal instincts towards Dren are right out of Mummy Dearest, and it takes several unexpected twists and turns. Splice is giddy good fun, the rare sci-fi flick that revels in its B-movie roots while also offering up something to think about over a beaker of coffee afterwards. I'll wrap up my look at great white northern sci-fi with Simulant from a Niagara Falls-born director. No, it's not James Cameron, who grew up in the historic village of Chippewa near Niagara Falls. I'm talking about television and film director April Mullen.
At Nexera, we ensure all simulants obey the precepts. The first precept is do not inflict harm on any human being.
Good morning.
The second precept restricts simulants from modifying themselves or any other simulant in any way.
Watch out!
Had that dream again.
Her film Simulant is set in a world where androids and humans coexist. The story focuses on a woman named Faye who pulled the plug on her late husband, but now can't bring herself to do the same to Evan, his android counterpart. Instead of deactivating Evan, Faye sets him up in an apartment to live illegally on his own. That's where he meets Casey, played by Simu Liu, a brilliant programmer who helps him become more human in order to win Faye back. Unbeknownst to Evan, his new friend is wanted for questioning by a determined artificial intelligence compliance enforcement agent. Evan has to win over Faye's heart before they're both discovered, and he loses everything.
The ongoing debate around simulant sentience intensifies.
Fourth gen, female!
Skeptics continue to voice concern over simulant integration into society.
You know she's a simulant.
A simulant? Are you sure?
The sim has been hacked. Somebody altered the restrictions.
So someone made it possible for it to hurt me.
Did you notice anything unusual about his behavior?
He didn't know that he was a sim. He was having dreams about his accident.
How do you create a simulant character, an android character, that the audience is going to care about? It's all about casting, I guess, and the writing, but tell me about approaching that.
I do love that. And we did want our character of Evan, who is a simulant, to feel very much alive and real, and for their relationship to feel organic, and for him to have very human thoughts and ideas and come to his wife with reasonable, propositions and really genuinely love her. So Robbie Amell and I really worked hard at being understated, being as human as possible. He delivers an amazing performance with a lot of depth to sort of underneath his very simple kind of lines. And he has one mission: to win his wife back.
Mm-hmm.
And he's torn the whole film because he wakes up realizing that the life that he thinks is his own is over. So he has to question the fact that he died, and what happens to someone who believes they're alive. And then not only are they shown that they're artificial, they've also have to come to terms with their own death and being, watching their human counterpart die in dreams. And what does that do to, I guess, an AI or a person? What does that do to someone? And he really brought to the table, I thought, a performance that was really beautiful. And everyone is rooting for him because he comes to Faye, his wife, with so much openness, love, and his intentions are so pure, because I think he's focused on one thing: how do I win her back? How do I get back the life I just lost? So for us, it was easy to sort of create that character because his intentions were so pure. Unfortunately, they go in different directions throughout the film, and it becomes, he will do anything at all costs to get back that life. And that's where things get dangerous.
You are not my husband. You're a mistake.
You don't mean that.
You're not him!
Then what am I? You're better.
No!
I can't help but feel like part of my husband moved into him. Like part of his soul's inside of him.
What do you think it is about a story like this that appeals to us?
Thematically, I think human beings have always had a hard time with loss, and memory, because both of those things happen to all of us, and they happen all around us, and they are not controllable. So you have memories and moments in your life which you want to hold on to so dearly, but memory, unfortunately, sort of is like sand coming through your fingertips, and you can't really grasp them. And the more you think of the memory, the further away it gets, and you can't really hold it. And it's part of why I love making films, is you can really capture those moments on film and replay them. It's sort of this obsession with how do we live forever and infinity, and we don't. We just don't. And especially with loss, when you lose a loved one, how do you feel like you can be in their presence again? Or how can you feel close to that person again? And I think death is a huge thing and grief is a huge thing that we as human beings don't really tackle front on. I think, within society, we sort of step away from it because it's so hard to talk about. If, you lose a soulmate or a loved one, or someone passes away too young, it's just almost too much pain to deal with. And so I think we've all had such a hard time dealing with it that now we're thinking maybe if there's a way to bring back those loved ones or clone those loved ones, would it be right? Would it be the same? Is it a future that we want to live in, or is it one will never be the same? People are still irreplaceable. I think that's a theme that's always sort of existed, and now we're just open to exploring it more.
That was April Mullen. You can find her film Simulant wherever you legally buy and download films. I'm Richard Krause. Thanks for listening to Maple Syrup for Your Eyes. I'll be back soon with more suggestions. In the meantime, be sure to celebrate and support Canadian films.